ask yourself, am I doing this because out of panic or out of wisdom, out of sober evaluation?
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam Camp, and I'm your host, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Great to be with you once again, Sam.
Always a pleasure, Richard. And I'll say up here at the top, it's a few months away, but I thought I would just put in a plug for our next spiritual leadership coaching workshop. It's going to be happening in Jonesboro, which is just south of Atlanta, about 20 minutes from the airport. So if you fly in, it's quite convenient. And that's going to be October 27th to 29th.
Yeah.
So Monday to Wednesday. And we would love to see any of our listeners there. We've had some come through the years, and that's always a treat for us to connect with the faceless audience that listens to us. And
you're around some. I try to drop in every day and do some teaching and some devotion. A lot of times I'll kick off the morning with a devotional thought, and so if you like to just kind of connect with some of the BMI staff, that's a great way to do it as well. So.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic workshop. We just wrapped up the one for the spring, and it's always just a great time of learning, of encouragement. You get to meet some really great people too, and we have them from all various industries and walks of life. And so I'll put a link to that in today's show notes, but you can find out more about that at blackabycoaching.org. But aside from that, we do want to talk today about leaders in crisis.
Yeah, and of course, we're in a season at the moment. It seems like there's always a season, but there's always a crisis at some point, whether it's the economy, whether it's political, cultural, terrorists. There's always some kind of crisis going on somewhere in the world, and I think especially with recent times with the stock market sort of plummeting and a lot of questions and concerns, this is perhaps a good time just to talk about how do leaders behave in times of crisis. And I would say, if there was never a crisis, if there was never a problem, we might not even need leaders. Leaders sort of earn their pay in times of crisis. And whether it's biblically, it just seemed like whenever there was a major problem, God would raise up a leader. And it wasn't that he could just solve all the problems, but he helped guide the people through the crisis. And so I want to talk just a bit about that because there's a lot of people that want to hold the office of a leader, but when it gets down to the brass tacks of, okay, here's where you need to step up and lead, sometimes leaders are behaving just like everybody else. And I do think that there's a certain responsibility for leaders. We kind of went through a season where we were so very egalitarian that we acted like, well, leaders aren't any different than anybody else. But there is a role for leaders, hence this podcast. But it doesn't mean that they, God loves leaders any more than he loves followers. But there is a calling to lead, and a lot of that calling takes place when there's problems, and certainly severe problems. And so
that's certainly where the quality of the leadership is exposed.
Yeah. And you see it all the time, like in a recession, in COVID, just different major crises. You could have several different companies all going through the same crisis, or several churches going through the same problems, but they come out differently. And a lot of that is because they're led differently. They respond to problems differently. So a couple things I would just say. One is in a crisis, leaders need to keep a steady hand. A crisis is not when you start jerking to the left and the right, knee-jerk responses. I know sometimes leaders feel like when there's a crisis, they've got to do something. They have to be seen as people of action. We're not just sitting still. We're going to do something. But the problem
doesn't matter what it is.
It's just you want the optics sometimes of being seen as being responsive, not just sitting idly by. And so I would say, but that's a time to not necessarily be making rash decisions. It's when it comes to things like the stock market and things go tumbling down. The most advice is that's not the time to start selling and making major changes. There's a time to, take a careful look. And it's not that you're not aware. It's not that you're not very much following what's happening. But you're being very careful to guide your organization through the crisis to the other side. And secondly, just along with that, just stay calm. When you start to panic like everybody else, then you can't see clearly either. And that's one of usually the superpowers of a leader, is that while maybe others are panicking, stressed out, filled with anxiety and fear, whether the leader might be feeling some of those feelings, but they've got to appear before the others as calm, as confident, that you know that you're not quite sure what it's going to take, but you are confident that you're going to get to the other side. And so that means that everyone, and that's what followers are looking for. They're looking, that's when they really are hoping that their leader knows what he's going to be doing, and that he's going to be working on it, that he's not sleeping in the back corner office, but that he's at the helm, he's watching what's going on, he's forming a plan, but he's not panicked. And so a third one is just take charge, step up. And sometimes that means you do have to put some things on hold. Maybe if there's a major cash crunch or some kind of financial crisis, maybe that means you put a hold on spending. Maybe you put a hold off purchases. Maybe you stop hiring. I mean, there's things where you step in and say, okay, there's been a lot of debate about. It's kind of like an EMT kind of person. If you find someone that's been in a car accident and they're hemorrhaging blood, that's not a time to necessarily be very democratic and say, okay, what does everybody think? Bill, what do you think we should do? Sally, what do you think we should do? There are times where you do need to just take charge, and some leaders have to lead at that point. And I've seen some people, some pastors, that ultimately were fired more than once because they just would never step up when someone had to decide. And again, it doesn't mean it's a knee-jerk decision, but it means that you've got to step up, and everybody's looking to you to lead, then you have to lead. And again, that doesn't mean you're doing anything drastic. It just means you're taking charge. And so if it was Franklin Roosevelt the day after Pearl Harbor is bombed, and he does a radio broadcast, or Churchill when he was making some of his speeches, it becomes clear that they are in charge and they embrace the responsibility, and they are going to take action, and they encourage people, don't panic. We may have been caught by surprise, but we're gonna have a response. And so there are times where, as a leader, people are looking for you to take charge. If all is in time, if it's peacetime, you don't have to have a War Measures Act. You don't have to be just making unilateral decisions. You've got time to talk to people and so on and get people's consensus. But in times of crisis, there are those moments where a leader does need to take charge and just decide some things, at least until we can see a better reason. We're going to not do this for the time being, or we're going to stop doing that. And so don't hesitate if you have to take charge. Of course, that doesn't mean that you just become a dictator or someone that is abusing your position. It just means that if decisions need to be made quickly, you need to take that responsibility to make quick decisions. And even when you're making quick decisions, that doesn't mean that you never check and talk to your closest advisors, but you make sure that those decisions get made when they need to be. And so taking charge. And oftentimes that's what has been the downfall of some leaders. A crisis happens and they're nowhere to be found. Or they're not in touch, or they're not on the scene at the time. And there's just something very reassuring about a leader being on the scene, in front of people, visible, clearly taking charge, that just calms everybody else down. And kind of going with that, a fourth thing is just speak up. Churchill, Roosevelt, folks like that, historically around World War II, were very good at that. The great leaders have been great communicators, and people don't need to hear from a leader every day, but when there's a crisis, they do want to hear regularly. They want updates. They want assurance. It is your chance. The leaders have to use the stage that they're given to extend their vision, their viewpoint, their calm, their confidence. And so leaders, and again, you don't have to necessarily be a great orator like a Churchill, but you need to be visible at the right time, and you need to say the right things. And so again, that doesn't mean you've got a great spellbinding speech, but it might be a memo you put out, but it's communicating things that people need to hear. And so don't go silent. I mean, it might mean that you're huddled up in your office with your top advisors trying to figure out a plan, but at some point you've got to come out and, at least if nothing else, just tell people that you're meeting right now and you're working on it constantly, working for a solution. But speak up so that people, they want to hear from leaders when there's a crisis. And that's why, whether it's the President of the United States giving a speech from the Oval Office in times of crisis, or what it might be, if it's just a town hall meeting where everybody's gathered so that the CEO can give an update. Just be aware that communication is critical. So obviously you can't just be on stage all the time. You got to be solving the problem, but be aware that the people are always they're dying to know what's being done. Is anything being done? And a fifth thing is just take the long view. As a leader, we kind of are tempted always to hit the panic button and just kind of maybe get rid of the short-term pain. But the fact is that leadership has to have a longer-term view, and we'll talk more about that in an upcoming podcast. But just be aware that the decisions we make today have consequences for tomorrow, and sometimes we're in such dire straits at the moment that we just don't really care what the consequences are tomorrow, or what the precedent will be that we're setting today. We just want to take action. But leaders have to always at least ask themselves, as dire as these circumstances may be, can I live with this result tomorrow, this precedent that I've just set? Can I, by treating staff, volunteers this way today, will I have any volunteers or staff tomorrow? You have to think about that. So keep a longer term view. And a sixth thing would just be you have to have confidence. You have to at least appear confident. In the recesses of your own mind and heart, you might have some great concerns yourself, and you might be uncertain what to do next. But there is a way of appearing confident, where, at least for those following you, they've got to know that you have a confidence that, not necessarily in yourself, but that you're confident that your organization will get to the other side. I've shared before, but when I was a seminary president, there were a couple of big crises that I had to deal with. And at one point, we were building a very large building for us. It was a very big financial undertaking. It required somewhere close to 500 volunteers. It required about $2 million in donations for us at that time. A number of years ago, that was enormous. And then all of a sudden, it just seemed like a bunch of things were all going wrong. The Canadian government at the border stopped letting any American volunteers come in, and almost all of our volunteers were coming from the States. And suddenly we're told, no, you can't have any of those. And the money, most of the money that was coming in at that time was coming in for that project from the States. And when we were expecting money, suddenly it's not there. It's not coming. And so several major devastating blows happened, and everybody is very concerned. I think by that time we'd already dug a hole for this new building. We're thinking we just convert this into a pond, fill it with water. What do we do if all of our best laid plans are falling apart? And I never forget just having some of the key people in my world at the time standing there with me, looking at this big hole in the ground. And one friend just said, "Richard, do you think you made a mistake? This could be a disaster." And I'm, that thought is crossing my mind, but I'm thinking, but I've got to appear confident here. I don't know the answer yet. I don't know. I can't read the future, but I've got to not panic when everybody else is reaching for the panic button. And that often is when you find out what what kind of metal the leader is made of when they face a crisis. And by the way, the way you handle a crisis earns you enormous trust for other times. There'll be days where the organization doesn't need you to necessarily be hands-on leading. You might not even be around. You might be out of town, but in the crises moments, you've got to rise to the occasion. When your organization really needs you, you can't let them down then. Otherwise, in the other times, they're not going to necessarily trust you either. So remain confident. I would also say, along with confidence, the seventh thing is just keep your humor, which seems almost counterintuitive when you're in a crisis. How can you? There's nothing humorous about a crisis, mm-hmm. But there's lots of cases where right before a major battle, a general just kind of put his people at ease with maybe a funny comment, or just in a crisis. It's interestingly, Ronald Reagan, after someone, Hinckley, tried to assassinate him and shot him, and there was a bullet that was, I think, less than an inch from his heart. When he first saw his wife, he actually had said to Nancy, he said, "Honey, I forgot to duck." and of course, could have easily been assassinated. He's got a bullet in his chest that they have to pull out. But Reagan was a master at diffusing situations sometimes by just making a humorous comment. And sometimes what humor says is, it doesn't mean that you're not taking things seriously, but it means you don't think it's the end of the world. Mm-hmm. That by an appropriate, there's inappropriate kind of humor that just shows you're just not very sensitive to the moment. But there are certain kinds of especially self-effacing humor that just kind of lightens the load. Lincoln was famous for that all through the Civil War. The Civil War was an awful bloodbath. More American soldiers died in that war than all the other wars combined that they've been involved in. But you couldn't just necessarily be constantly downcast the whole time because you're in a crisis. And so Lincoln was very good at that. So a lot of historians have said that was one of the problems with Jimmy Carter when he was the president, was that the American hostages had been captured in Iran, and in many ways, Carter let his presidency be hijacked. And Carter was always very somber, and of course he was concerned, and he wanted to get those hostages freed, but he gave some speeches. In fact, he famously gave a speech that was called a malaise speech, where he just basically, he was trying to be truthful, he was trying to speak with integrity, but it was just so downcast that it cost a lot of his popularity, because they wanted him to be honest, they wanted him to take things seriously, but if the leader is so downcast himself, it erodes confidence in them. When a leader can still be humorous, even in a crisis, that tells people he's not overwhelmed by this. He's not been. He still must be confident, because he can be humorous even in a crisis. So, yeah. And that's a fine line, and that's really, in some ways, because I've known other leaders who tried to be humorous, but it just sounded very insensitive, very inappropriate. And so that's a fine line to be speaking. And that's why sometimes, like with a lot of humor, the best kind sometimes is just when you're poking fun at yourself. But humor in a crisis sometimes can actually be a turning point if you use it well. And then 8, just be honest. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily show all the cards in your hand. There may be some things you're aware of that you aren't ready to disclose to others, but stuff that needs to be told. You don't also want to just lie about the facts either. You don't want to conceal things that are important for people to know about. And so being honest is also crucial in a crisis, because you have to be the leader has to be viewed as trustworthy in a crisis. That's when you're in a crisis. Everybody is asking, well, who can we trust? Who's telling the truth? Whose opinion is dead on, and can we take to the bank? And so that's certainly not a time to be caught distorting the truth. And sometimes we really want to just put a good spin on things, but that's going beyond the evidence. That's going beyond the facts. And so to be able just to say, here's what we know so far, and we'll keep you posted. Sometimes that's very comforting. Sometimes people would rather know the truth than just wonder what the truth is, even if the truth is hard. And then a 9th thing is just encourage your team. The people that you're working with, the people on the front lines, those are the ones that you've got to be personally encouraging. The ones who are doing the all-nighters, trying to solve the problem. Sometimes there's a lot. Well, in times of crisis, your staff, your volunteers, your people can have a lot of wear and tear. And as a leader, you got to be aware of that. You have to know what the limits are. And there comes a point where maybe you just have to tell your people, go home. You don't need to stay here all night. Go get some rest. Come back tomorrow. Take the weekend off. Things can wait. But when you start showing concern and encouragement to your people, that also makes them want to. They want you to lead them in a time of crisis, because sometimes we can be so concerned about our own role, our own reputation, that we become thoughtless or careless about our people that are on the front lines making sacrifices. So a good leader is always aware of who's really paying the price here to keep the ship afloat right now, and solve the problems. And we've already kind of mentioned this, but a 10th thing: just don't panic or make panic-motivated decisions. Ask yourself, am I doing this because out of panic or out of wisdom, out of sober evaluation? And sometimes you'd say, no, I'm just panicking and just feeling a need to do something. But be careful about panic motivated decisions or actions, because those often you end up regretting later. And we're kind of seeing this now with looking back over some of the recent crises that governments made decisions about, and now they're paying the price for that, because now some of the decisions that were made is now appearing to press not have been the best one, but they made them, and just realize you're going to have to live with the consequences of whatever you decide to do or not to do. So you don't want just panic to drive what you do, because that too often that drives you to have regrets later. And then just a last thing, maybe kind of with that too, is just don't say or do things you're going to regret. Again, I've kind of touched on this, but there's a lot of regrets that leaders have that a lot of times you'll think, boy, I wish I could just have another shot at that crisis. I'd be so much more confident. I'd be much more God-centered. I would be more calm. If I just knew how things were going to work out, I could have handled things so much better. But that's the thing about leadership. Nobody has a crystal ball to see the future. And so we just have to lead well all along the way, even before we know how it's going to turn out, because we do realize people have memories. They're going to remember how we treated them, what we said, how we behaved. And so sometimes take a moment. I've had moments. I remember after having to make a very difficult decision one time as a seminary president, that everybody in the whole seminary knew what I'd done, and now I've got to go out and lead a chapel service. And so I'm sitting in my office before chapel, praying, thinking, processing, and trying to decide, really trying to just ask God to get me into the place where when I step out in front of all those people, I am the leader that they need me to be, that I'm confident, that I've thought through carefully what needs to be done and said. I'm not defensive. I'm not insecure. I'm not covering up. And sometimes I think a leader just, you need to just kind of cloister yourself for a bit and think through what kind of leader does my people need right now. Let me rise to the occasion and be that leader. And so, Sam, I think for leaders, it's just inevitable that our organizations at time will go through some troubled waters. Sometimes a whole nation, even a whole world will do that. But hopefully the people that we lead are going to feel fortunate that when they did go through that crisis, they had us as a leader and that we led them well. We didn't have all the answers. We'd never maybe been down that road before, but we knew it was our responsibility to step up and to lead and to guide our organization through to the other side. And so, I think it's always maybe lasting just to say is that the best way to prepare for that is before you get into the crisis. You don't know what the crisis will be, but you can prepare yourself to be calm, to be prayerful, to have wise counselors around you, to have done all you can to do your homework, to be prepared so that you don't have to necessarily scramble quite as much when the crisis comes. And I have a feeling that in the days to come, there's probably going to be more crises ahead. Mm-hmm. And the key, hopefully, is we won't know what the crisis is, but hopefully we prepared ourselves well enough that we can be the leader our people need when the crisis comes.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.